Yeah, they have to convert to Christianity in this doomsday. Yeah, of course, or they will be shish kebabbed in hell. They wanted to get rid of all the Jews in only to get back the only Jew they wanted, which is Jesus Christ, you know. What the sons of Israel 2,000 years ago were actually a nation. And the kingdoms that are mentioned in the Bible are the first nation states of Israel. They were destroyed by the Romans.
Yeah.
And this is a huge historical fabrication. This is one of the main explanations for the ethnic cleansing. I think Arafat developed that myth, that on one of the Israeli coins or in the Knesset, you have a map from the Euphrates in Iraq to the Nile in Egypt. As
from the Nile to the Euphrates. That you see that the Zionist project is at decline or an end point.
As a scholar, I can see clear indications for the collapse. One indication is the implosion from within the Israeli Jewish society. Yeah. Ironically, the Hamas operation delayed it.
Hello, Dr. Élan Papé.
Hello, very nice meeting you.
Thank you, it's an honor. Without too many introductions, you're a historian, you're a political scientist, and ironically maybe, you are the director of the European Center for Palestine Studies. Knowing that you were born in Israel, it is maybe ironic for you to be the one that's the director of that bureau. To begin this talk with you as one of the most prominent figures, people who worked on history of Palestine, how or what went wrong or what went right for a citizen of Israel, you were born in the 50s, for you to begin to try to search for another way to interpret history? And when did that happen?
Right. Well, such a trajectory where you get out from a tribe, if you want, a collective identity, a very indoctrinated society, doesn't happen in a day. And it doesn't happen because of one event or on a particular day. It's a process. It's a process. It's almost like a journey on a train that have very important stations on the way. So looking back, I can understand the stations that I went through. And probably there's one station which I can never find exactly. That is the station when you say there's no way back, that you are absolutely sure that you have done the right thing.
Was it before your choice of majoring in history, or
no,
it was a result?
The result. So I think I should say that I was born in 1954, and probably until the beginning of the 1980s, I had a conventional Israeli Jewish upbringing, experience of life.
Wow.
What happened in 1980 was that I decided to, first of all, to become a professional historian at an early age. I decided to study outside of Israel, and I decided to study 1948 because I thought it was a very important year, and also a year that, according to the declassification of documents in Britain, the United Nations, and Israel, in 1978, they declassified for the first time important documents on 1948.
So it was intriguing.
Yeah, exactly. And I chose also by coincidence, not as kind of an ideological decision, to do a PhD in England under a supervision of an Arab supervisor.
By coincidence.
By coincidence. I didn't seek him, but I started talking who can I work with in Oxford where I was, and everybody suggested Albert Khurani, the late Albert Khurani, a Lebanese historian. Well, I mean, he at the age of 1 he went from Lebanon to Manchester, but he felt very connected to Lebanon, and his brothers were in Lebanon. But he was also very connected to Palestine because he represented the Palestinians in 1946 in front of the Anglo-American Committee. And he was willing to take me, which was a surprise for me because I'm Israeli. But he was willing. Maybe he saw something that I didn't. And working with him on 1948, on documents that nobody else has seen before, in a place outside of Israel where you meet Palestinians and Arabs in a more equal footing.
Yeah.
All produced the first station. The first station was whatever I knew about 1948 was not true, according to what I found in the documents and what I found in the archives. That was the beginning of the journey.
We'll talk about
We'll come back to this,
48,
I'm sure.
at length. But
Yeah,
if I want to go back to this conventional childhood or upbringing, what are the main tenets of this conventional upbringing in Israel? Yeah,
probably the most important ones is you hardly meet any Arabs, any Palestinians. It's not a physically segregated society like in apartheid South Africa, but informally, it's segregated. So the first Palestinians you meet are in the university, but not before that. Secondly, the army plays a very important role in the life of young Israelis, unless they are born anti-Zionists, or they're born into an anti-Zionist family, like my children. But if you are not, it looks to be very natural to obey the obligatory recruitment to the army, which I did. So I participated in the 1973 war on the Golan Heights as a regular soldier, nothing special. But I didn't think there was something wrong with it when I was 18 years old. So that's what I call kind of a conventional upbringing. And the idea is that you will continue to be very loyal to Zionism because you were in the army, because you were a product of the Israeli educational system. But I was able to deprogram myself, if you want, through the historical research, through the intimate relationship with Arab and Palestinian scholars, and through the fact that I was able, in very important years like 1982, the first invasion of Lebanon, 1987, the first Intifada uprising, that I was able to be outside of Israel in those two crucial years. And what you see from the outside, you don't see from the inside.
What is the difference between being in the inside and the outside? Maybe at that time, information was skewed into narrower tunnels. Now maybe you have internet and you have TV. But I heard a seminar for Gideon Levy saying that Israelis now in this Gaza war don't know really what's happening in Gaza. I was astounded.
The fact that there is internet and the fact that there is alternative media and there is possibilities to know if you want to know doesn't mean that the Israelis want to know. So most Israeli Jews are being fed by the official Israeli media. Even if they know that there is an alternative, they don't want to look at the alternative. And therefore, Gideon Levy is absolutely right. And what is true in the early 1980s, when I began to see things differently from the outside, is true today in 2024. They still don't know. If you look in Israeli news bulletins today on Gaza, there's nothing about the destruction of Gaza. There's nothing about the killing of civilians. The only thing there is, again and again, they show the picture of the morning of the 7th of October. They show the pictures of the military going in, interviews with soldiers and so on. But the average Israeli viewer or listener, if he or she are only fed by Israeli media, do not think that something terrible is going on in Gaza. And they are convinced by the Israelis that if they're going to hear about it, it's propaganda. It's fabrication.
Going back to the 80s, when this, I don't know what to call it, change of mind happened through education, what was the reaction of your closed ones to this revelation?
It's not an easy exercise. Your members of your family, your teachers in the university, your colleagues, not all of them, but most of them would look at such a change of heart as treason. So you are very quickly ostracized, condemned, boycotted. People would decide not to talk to you anymore. There is a price to be paid for that. It's not the same price, of course, as the Palestinians are paying as victims of this, but I can see how it can deter some Israeli Jews who know the facts as much as I do, who would think twice of doing it because they understand that if they do it, it will come with a price.
Yeah, they are not willing to pay the cost.
They're not willing to pay the cost. And especially, if they are in the academia, they can pay with their career. Academics, as it goes, are not very courageous people on best of times. So don't expect them to be there. In fact, usually the bravest anti-Zionist Jews we had in Israel were not academics. There were people who were committed to human rights and so on, but they came from different walks of life, not necessarily the academia.
We'll go back to the discussion of the history of Palestine that you worked on with several books.
Yeah.
But a question related to this topic, how would any Israeli think of Zionism now? What is the main perception of Zionism? Because I want to ask you, what are also the tenets of Zionism? Because we hear too much of this word, but maybe it's not well defined on what is Zionism and how Israelis perceive Zionism to be.
Right. Well, any ism is a bit difficult because it has more than one interpretation, of course, and it's also a dynamic interpretation. So the way Zionism was defined, let's say 100 years ago, is not necessarily exactly how it is being defined today. I think most Israelis would define Zionism today as a supremacist Jewish ideology that at the heart of this is the claim, an exclusive claim to historical Palestine, not just to the state of Israel, but also to the occupied West Bank, and as we learned recently, also back to the Gaza Strip. So the whole historical Palestine is a Jewish space, always was and will be.
And this is a gray area because you hear sometimes even people dragging in the Sinai desert. Sometimes the region gets even bigger.
Yeah, the reason for this confusion is that there is a stream, it's not a mainstream, but there is a stream in Zionism, an older one, and it has some representation today, but I think it's more marginal than it used to be, that sees Transjordan, as they would call it, or Jordan, as part of historical Palestine. I think the myth that I think Arafat developed that myth, that on one of the Israeli coins or in the Knesset, you have a map from the Euphrates in Iraq to the Nile in Egypt as
from the Nile to the Euphrates.
No, that's not true. Zionism is bad enough, but its territorial ambition are nowadays covering what we would call historical Palestine from the river to the sea.
Okay.
So Zionism is, first of all, an absolute and exclusive claim to that space, Palestine from the river to the sea, as a Jewish space. Secondly, it sees Judaism as the only nationality that is legitimate within that space. So it's totally denial of a Palestinian nationality. And thirdly, it believes still that it represents Judaism as well, not just Zionism. The fact that most of the Jews are not there is still a vision for the future that they will come.
Yeah, it's a potential.
It's a potential, exactly. And of course, at the midst of it is this idea which, most normal people would find quite bizarre, but it sounds to them very logic, that they were coming back after 2,000 years of exile to a land that was actually empty and waited for their return. And I think most Zionists still believe in it, in the myth that, the famous maxim that Zionism is a movement of people without land coming back to a land without people.
Yeah. Now going back to history, knowing this definition, there are many questions. How can you define an ideology based on Jewish supremacy, based on the reclaiming of the homeland, while it was discussed at the beginning if it would be Palestine or another country where it should be a homeland for the Jews? So how did this click between the historical emphasis on Israel in the Bible or whatever? How did it come to be now Palestine as the destination?
it's important to understand how Zionism was born. First of all, it was a Christian project long before it was a Jewish project, an evangelical Christian project. Because for many evangelical Christians, what they called the return of the Jews was meant to precipitate the second coming of the Messiah and so on. And these were important people. I mean, this vision was shared by people who were prime ministers in Britain, presidents in the United States. So, and this is long before Jews were thinking about the return to Palestine. And it influenced Jewish intellectuals, because Zionism did not begin necessarily with the idea of the return to Palestine. It began as a reaction to anti-Semitism in Central and Eastern Europe that became particularly harsh and ruthless in the second half of the 19th century. So the Jews were looking, some of the Jewish intellectuals and activists said, it seems that Europe doesn't want us. So what are the options? And they believed that one option was to get out of Europe. And as you may know, they didn't only think about Palestine as a destination. They thought about other places as well. And secondly, they thought that maybe there's still a chance for the Europeans to accept them if they will secularize Judaism and turn it from a religion to a nation. Maybe the Jews could be recognized as a nation and there will be less hatred to them. So the whole idea that they, murdered Jesus and all these things may disappear. Now, at a certain point, the intellectuals that led the Zionist movement began to think about Palestine as the only option for where you can save Jews and turn Judaism into a nation. And when they decided on this, they encountered the fact that quite a lot of colonialists encountered, or settler colonialists, when they were looking for a safe place outside of Europe, that someone else lives there. I mean, the Zionist leaders knew that Palestine was not empty. Definitely. But they were at the end of the colonialist era, where the fact that other people lived in the place you wanted was not a consideration that would, cancel the project of colonialism. It's true about those who went to North America, Australia, and so on. Of course, there was a difference from the way the society in Palestine was than the society of the Native Americans. And these are also different historical periods. Yeah. But the mentality was the same, namely, okay, there are Arabs there, so to speak. Maybe many of them are not really connected to the land. And anyway, we are the Europeans, and we'll have the support of the Europeans, so we can both colonize Palestine and get rid of the local population.
Yeah.
What they needed was to show that this is also a religious issue. Because most of the Jews, when Zionism started, were religious, unlike today, where many Jews are secular. So and what is the problem with religious Jews? According to the Jewish religion, you cannot return to Palestine unless God wants you to return. And the fact that you decide to be modern or secular, it does not go well with the religion.
So it can't happen as a result of a human endeavor.
Exactly. You need signs from God that this is the right place. And most of the big rabbis in the world rejected Zionism because of that. As you know, even today, ultra-Orthodox Jews are anti-Zionist because of that. They think Zionism is tempering. What the leaders of the Zionist movement did was quite clever. They did two things that helped them. One, they looked at the Bible, the Old Testament, that most religious Jews are not interested in that much. It's not like the Quran or the New Testament. Most of the Jews are learning the Talmud, the Mishnah, the books that interpret.
Yeah.
They know the Bible, but this is not what they're learning. They're learning the interpretations. The Zionist movement turned the Bible from a religious text to a historical text, to a legal text. They said, well, the Bible proves, which it doesn't, by the way, but it does prove that Palestine belongs to us. Now, the Christian Zionists loved it. They said, yeah, they're right, the Bible proves it. So they had the support of the Christian. The problem was still with the religious. They found enough rabbis to create what we call today religious Zionism. So they had few rabbis that began to give them religious legitimization, to combine nationalism with religion together.
Even at the earliest era.
Even in the earliest one, yeah. In fact, the first rabbis who gave religious legitimization to Zionism are a family of rabbis called the Cook K-O-O-K, the son of this rabbi and the grandson particular, these are the gurus of the Jewish settlers who went to the West Bank in 67.
Oh.
Because according to them, colonizing Palestine, getting rid of the Palestinian, is a religious imperative. The secular Zionists did not say it's a religious imperative. They said it's, we are part of Western civilization, so we have the right to do whatever we want with non-Western people.
Yeah.
But the religious Zionists, which you have their representative now pushing for the Judaization of Gaza, for the expulsion of the Palestinians from the West Bank, the creation of theocracy, a Jewish theocracy in Israel, are the ideological grandchildren of these religious Zionist Jews. So, with the support of religious Zionists, with the idea of the Bible that was very liked by the Christians, they began to build this idea that Palestine historically was always the Jewish homeland. And what was really bizarre, they convinced enough people with power that the Jews who do not appear in the Bible, the word Jew doesn't appear in the Bible. Well, the sons of Israel, 2,000 years ago, were actually a nation. And that the kingdoms that are mentioned in the Bible are the first nation states of Israel that were destroyed by the Romans.
Yeah.
And this is a huge historical fabrication, but you needed a lot of academics to help them, and a lot of people in the West bought in, for whatever reason, to that idea. And once they had and by the way, many of the people in the West who supported this idea were anti-Semites.
Yeah,
because what is better than to say, if the Jews don't want to be in Europe and want to go to Palestine, very good.
That's what I thought of the idea when you said about the Christian Zionists during that era, calling for the Jews back to Palestine as a sort of fulfilling of a prophecy. It works both ways. Then the prophecy would be fulfilled and would get rid of the Jews.
Yeah, they have to convert to Christianity in this doomsday. Yeah, of course, or they will be shish kebabbed in hell. I always say that because I think Jesus was a Jew to begin with, that they wanted to get rid of all the Jews and only to get back the only Jew they wanted, which is Jesus Christ. So yeah, this today you can understand. If you know that, you understand. People ask how come anti-Semitic right-wing Europeans are such great supporters of Israel.
Yeah.
This is the connection.
Yeah,
this
is the foundation.
Exactly.
During that period where because what you were talking about was quite interesting, because what we know about that era is that the first wave of Zionists were mostly secular and mostly to the left as a socialist form of governing. When did this transformation happen? Was it during the institutionalization of Israel as a state after the 48, when Israel was the religious strands, or was it, as I have read many places, after the year 67, where the land of Israel, the historical land of Palestine, the land of Israel now, matched what was interpreted as being said in the Bible?
Yeah. I think it's much earlier than that. I think in a very early stage, the most important person in the Zionist side between 1920 to probably 63, David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel and the leader of the Zionist community, he understood very well that universal values such as socialism, in which he believed when he was a young man. He took part in the attempt in the revolution in Russia in 1905. He believed in it to begin with.
He took part in it.
He took part in it. But he thought that universal values should come second to the national, what he called the national values. I would call it the colonialist values. So very early on, under his guidance, socialism was always subjected to the Zionist value system. So, for example, if according to socialist point of view, you should treat Arab and Jewish workers in the same way, right?
Yeah,
the workers of the world unite.
Definitely.
According to Zionist socialism, Arab workers are a threat to the Zionist project. And therefore he coined this idea of Hebrew labor during the mandatory period, which meant expelling the Palestinians from the labor market and give it and actually threatening anyone employing Palestinians that they are undermining the Zionist project. So I think very early on these universal values mattered very little. Yeah. And it became what we use nowadays we call it rightly settler colonial project, you know.
But were they only an intellectual leaning of some of the leaders of the Zionist movement, or was it also useful in the state building phase? Because then Israel made a big shift towards the right and the neoliberal in the 80s. So was it an intellectual endeavor or
it was also functional? It was practical as well, because if you think about it, if you create a kibbutz, a communal collective, it means it's cheap, it's not expensive, you create solidarity, and you can build this as a base for further colonization.
Yeah.
If you believe in nationalization of land as a socialist, that helps the colonization of the land. So they used the socialist values also in order to protect the Zionist project. But once they had the state, that was not necessary anymore. But when it was still serving them, take one important agency, the Jewish National Fund, the JNF. It's the most important agency for colonization. They are the ones who bought the land during the mandatory period. They are the ones who took over the lands after the Palestinians were dispossessed. And they are the ones who decided whether to build a Jewish colony on the ruins of the Palestinian village or to plant a forest. And they did the same to some parts of the West Bank as well. This is a very national socialist project. It's not a capitalist project.
Yeah.
It's a national socialist project. But because it is a Zionist project, the whole idea of nationalization of the land, that the land belongs to the people and not to a private person, which is an anti-capitalist idea, if you want, is meant to make sure that nobody sells lands to the Palestinians and nobody is doing businesses that can, undermine the project of the dispossession of the Palestinians. So they used it cleverly.
So it was also functional.
It was also functional, no doubt about it.
After this intellectual review of Zionism and maybe some practicalities, I would like to go back to the juncture of 48, which you studied. Through what you studied in the UK at university, what was uncovered and what had changed from the national Israeli story of what happened and what you discovered in reality? What were the main issues?
Yeah. I think there were 3 or 4 major points. The first one, which was important, I think, to us as Israelis, was less important, I think, to Palestinians and the rest of the world, but was important. We were brought up on this idea that very few Zionist troops and later Israeli troops were fighting a huge Arab army, the David against Goliath.
Yeah.
Yes. And the only explanation why David won was a miracle. So even if you were a secular historian, you would have written, this is due to the amazing people we are. That's, of course, if you're a religious Jew, you said, this is a proof that God is with you. Now, we checked the balance. We were the first one to check. I say we because we're a group of historians, known later as the new historians, who worked on these archives. And we looked at the balance of power. And it seems that every given moment, the Zionist forces and later the Israeli forces always were larger in number than anyone facing them. Definitely they were much larger in number than the Palestinian paramilitary groups, which they fought until May 1948. But even when some of the Arab governments sent some troops into Palestine after the 15th of May 1948, still the Israeli army had more soldiers than the Arab armies, was better equipped, much more experienced in fighting. So there was no miracle as a result of the war. So this idea that Israel is invincible because it has a particularly, an army that could never be defeated because it's so better than any Arab army.
And it works both ways, to the ascension of the feeling of the Israelis themselves and to the diminution of the Arabs.
Absolutely, absolutely. All kinds of myths. The Arabs are not fighting at night and all kinds of nonsense like this. That, of course, 73 proved they're wrong. 82, 87, not to mention the 2000 and 2006, exactly, and now as well. So, but never mind. That at that time it looked like true. The second one, which is probably the most important one, and maybe I should add to this another thing we found, which also complicated our relationship with the Jordanians. We didn't realize how strong the alliance between the Jewish leadership in Palestine, the Zionist leadership in Palestine, with the Transjordanians was. I call them Transjordanians because there was no Jordan yet. With Amir Abdallah, the great-grandfather of the present king. We didn't realize how strong the connections were and how important they were in influencing the result of the 48 fighting. Because there was an unwritten agreement between the Israeli army and the Jordanian army that allowed actually the Jordanian army to take over what became the West Bank without fight, and the Jordanians did not fulfill their role in the Pan-Arab program. They were supposed to meet the Egyptian forces in Fallujah, but they never arrived, and that was not because they didn't find a way. This was important because it also understood, not in order to blame the Jordanians. We did it in order to show that this explains also the balance of power. Because the Arab Legion was the most experienced Arab army in the Arab world at the time. So neutralizing it
made it more possible for an easy victory.
Much easier, exactly. The other point, which is probably the most important one, we grew up on this idea that the Palestinians left voluntarily. And they decided to leave because the Arab leaders told them to leave, the Palestinian leaders told them to leave, so it was their fault for becoming refugees. The documents are very, very clear about how the Zionist leadership prepared long before 48 the massive expulsion of the Palestinians, what I called in my book the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. This was for us, for me at least, I can now speak of myself personally, I was really surprised. I didn't know these things. I mean, I heard it from some Palestinians and so on, but I thought it's not true. I thought people, maybe in a war like a war, people become refugees. I didn't realize how much the war was actually the means to complete an ethnic cleansing that started before the war. So the idea that the Palestinians became refugees as a result of a systematic program of ethnic cleansing was, I think, the most important thing we found in the archives. And we also found that sometimes massacres that accompanied the ethnic cleansing did not happen just like that. They were premeditated. They were planned in order to accelerate the flight of the Palestinians. The third one, which really surprised me personally, I didn't realize that whoever was feeling that he represents the Palestinian people after the Nakba, and there were various organizations. The Arab Higher Committee was still there. There was a special section of the Palestinians in the Arab League, and some individual Palestinians were willing to discuss with the new state of Israel some sort of a new arrangement. And they went to a peace conference in Lausanne, in Switzerland, organized by the United Nations.
At what year that was?
That was in April 1949. In April 1949. And the United Nations was willing, understood that the Palestinians, because of all what happened, are willing to discuss some sort of partition, but not the one that was offered to them, a more reasonable one, provided also that all the refugees would return to their homes and accept a kind of an Israeli entity on agreed borders at the time. But the Israelis totally rejected this initiative.
knowing that 2 years earlier they proclaimed their acceptance of the partition plan.
Exactly.
So what happened during those 2 years?
They understood that they gained so much by war that there was no need to go back to the partition.
Yeah.
They didn't want to give up their achievements. Let's say that there was no agreement. But not only the Palestinians. In Lausanne, you had a Syrian delegation, a Lebanese delegation, an Egyptian delegation, and a Jordanian delegation. And they were willing to discuss the future of Palestine after the Nakba with what became Israel. I don't know exactly how it would have unfolded, but what interested me was the fact that the Israelis failed this attempt.
Yeah.
And it's important because there is a myth that the Israelis developed that all the time there is a chance for peace and the Palestinians are missing it.
Yeah, they can't.
Abba even used to say, they always miss an opportunity. They don't miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity for peace. And as Avi Shleim has shown in his book, The Iron Wall, it was usually the opposite. There was always, for good or for worse, we can criticize this Palestinian position if we want, or the Arab position. Whenever there was a Palestinian or an Arab willingness to discuss genuinely some sort of an agreement, it's always Israel that rejects the initiative.
Maybe as in the Western media, it's not very well known, but in the Arab world, there is this critical review of the Arab leadership as being too accepting of anything that's being offered.
Which is historically true.
Yeah.
You know, even Jamal Abdel Nasser, who is revered because of 67, which I think he didn't intend to do.
Yeah.
In the 50s, he had intensive negotiations with the Israelis that people don't know about, in which he said, I can accept a small Israel, not the one that exists, without the Nakab, because he wanted a land bridge between Egypt and the rest of the Arab world. An Israel that would accept the return of the refugees. And yes, you can have an entity, so the political entity, the Jews would feel safe, and I would guarantee the safety as well as the leader of Egypt. This was his idea. Of course, the Israelis rejected
Definitely
this. But he, you know, people don't have this image of Jamal Abdel Nasser. He said, I'm not anti-Jewish, I don't want to fight this, but I cannot ignore the Palestinian issue.
Yeah.
And I cannot accept an alien country that serves American imperialism in the midst of the Arab world. But it doesn't mean that I don't understand that at that time there were 1.5 million Jews. He did not talk like Khomeini later, you know, or the Iranian leader said all these Jews should go back to their lands, countries of origin. Which would make more sense in 54 than now.
Maybe at that time.
Exactly. But he didn't even use that. He didn't say that. He said, no, they can stay, but they cannot be an aggressive alien. Now, of course, Egyptians today, if you say to them they don't like it, they say, no, Nasser always fought for the Palestinians. And I said, yes, he fought for the Palestinians. But you don't only fight for the Palestinians by the discourse of destruction.
Yeah.
You can fight for the Palestinians by creating political realities that are reasonable and pragmatic.
Sure, but maybe the problem with this very logical rationale is that those Palestinians who relied or hoped too much on the peace process later on were rewarded with the, I don't know what to call it, the case of the West Bank and the current leadership of the Palestinian Authority.
You're absolutely right.
So now there is a despair of peace as a way to achieve any kind of prosperity.
And rightly so. I think the Palestinians are right to analyze, this is my analysis as well. There was never and will never be something you can call the peace camp in Israel. Or to put it simply, there's no one to talk to.
I will go back to this because
there's no one to talk to in Israel. But I'm not saying that there was someone to talk to. I'm just saying that contrary to the image in the West, the Palestinians were dying to talk to someone reasonably, logically about what happened to them, rather than, talking about revenge and destruction.
There is this connection that you spoke to about imperialism and at least in the eyes of Abdel Nasser back then. But what is the true relationship? Because Israel has always been either related to the British in the first era, or later on to the United States, which is now some even of the Americans see that this is not a logical relationship. You wouldn't
Right.
know who is the stronger one of this part of the alliance. How did Israel always forge this? Is it through what's been always repudiated as the influence of the lobby, or was there any really national interest for the British at the time or for the Americans later on?
I don't think national interests are independent factors in life. Every country has different national interests. But if you know how to manipulate it, you make that country believe that you are the national interest. In other words, without the lobby, most of what the Americans and the British at the time, and later the Americans, would think that Israel is a national, those who think that Israel became a national interest, did it because there was a strong work by the lobby to make sure that it does. I can give you an example. For instance, there were many Arab states and many Arab rulers, as you know, who were willing to serve the American imperialism. The list is not short, unfortunately. So why is Israel a better ally? In fact, I think Israel is far more complicated, troublesome ally for America than an Arab ruler who would say...
Costly.
Yeah, and costly.
Yeah.
An Arab ruler who said, yeah, sure, just give me the weapons and so on. To make sure that, to see Israel as a better ally, and I won't name names, a better ally than any other Arab country, you need the lobby for that. And you have to understand, the lobby of Israel in the United States and in Britain is 120 years old. It was not very effective to begin with, but it was built, there is a foundation there, are very, very deep. And the lobby is very, very important. On the other hand, because the lobby is so important, it is not always able to do what it was set up to do. Namely, I think that it's easier to sell a small Jewish Israel at the beginning. It's easy to sell a liberal Israel, a liberal Israel.
Yeah. Especially after the Holocaust.
And after the Holocaust. But is it possible to sell, even if you have a strong lobby, a Ben Gvir Smotrich Israel?
What's ironic is that when you hear Ben Gvir or Smotrich, you don't see that they are doing much of an effort to appeal to the Americans.
They don't care about the lobby anymore.
They don't.
They don't. They think that they have Trump, that they have the right wing in Europe, but they're really messianic. That's a new kind of Zionism, these people. Because they are messianic, and genuinely they think that it doesn't matter whether the international community is with you or not. There still is an important part of the Zionist leadership, probably represented by someone like Gantz. If your listeners know who is, this.
This is the so-called moderate.
The moderate.
Yeah.
They care about international legitimacy. They do. But I don't think they are the important political force in Israel anymore. The Messianic Jews care much less. They get a lot of support from the fascist neo-rights in Europe. I think they misunderstand the right wing in America. I think that's why Israel is going to fall, among other things.
Wow.
Because they think that the right wing in America...
This is a main point later on.
Yeah, later on. But I just want to say that the right wing in America is not like the right wing in Europe. The right wing in Europe would see fascist Israel as a great idea. And if they the right wing is in power in Italy, in Hungary, in Denmark.
It's knocking on the door in France.
Knocking on the door in France, exactly. So they're not that stupid when they say we have allies in Europe who don't care what we do to the Palestinians. Yeah. I don't think they understand the right wing in America. The right wing in America wants America to deal only with America. And they have no empathy to a state that demands so much money. Yeah. Look at Trump. Trump doesn't want to give money either to Israel or to the Ukraine.
Or to NATO.
To NATO, to anyone. Yeah. To anyone.
So but at the same time, it was during the days of Trump that they gave too many gifts to the Israelis.
Yeah,
under
that's
the
a Republican
Abraham
in the
Accords.
Senate, but I think there will be a different Republican Senate if he wins.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll get into it. Coming back to the main point that we were discussing. I think that for the Israelis, until a certain moment, the legitimacy or the imperial support, first the British one and the American one, was crucial, and I think that's why they built such a powerful lobby. By the way, the lobby is not just Jewish. The lobby is Christian as well. In America, the Christian part of the pro-Israeli lobby is even more powerful than the Jewish one. And this is important to remember.
So-called evangelicals.
Evangelical Christians who are millions and millions of Americans, and they have a president and they have a vice president and secretary of state every now and then. So people with a lot of money and a lot of political power. But they built it. They built it. The lobby created what I call global Israel. It created this idea where you can support Israel because you are a Christian, evangelical Christians. You're a Jew who is worried about your future. You are a member of a military industrial complex, and you think that Israel is good business. You don't care about Judaism or Zionism, but you think it's a good, you are Islamophobic. You think that Israel, you buy into Netanyahu and his friends' ideas that Israel is the last bastion against the attack of the barbarian Islamic world, the Samuel Huntington kind of the clash of civilization. So you create an alliance that people support Israel for, not always for the same reason, but you have to maintain this support. And the lobby
and one cannot escape the idea that there might be also some racist element also.
Of course, there is. It's a double racism. One racism is very clear. Is racism towards Arabs and Muslims. Yeah. That helps a lot, the lobby. But ironically, it's racism against Jews as well, because Israel means that the Jews are not with us. Yeah. Thank God they will be in Israel.
They will
it's kind of a curious double racism that we're talking about. But what I have a new book coming out, which is called Lobbying for Zionism Across the Atlantic, and I show how from 1900, both in America and in Britain, they already built this method, which is the most important one, that you target politicians, wherever they are, at the beginning of their career, very early in their career, you commit them to Zionism and later to Israel. So when they...
So you target them intellectually, or you target them by...
No, with money and with a threat that you will support their rivals. If they don't, if they're not with you, you will be with their rivals.
Since the beginning of the 1900s?
Beginning of the 20th century, from the very first year of the 20th century. This was the method. And at first, of course, they were not powerful enough to influence enough people. But, the more they grew in numbers, they were able to influence more. And they take a risk. Not every junior politician will become a senior politician, but some of them do. So when people say, why does Biden so automatically supports Israel, the lobby doesn't need to ring Biden and say to him, you better support Israel.
He knows the rules of the game.
He knows the rules. The inertia is there. He knows what happened to anyone who even dared to slightly, like Obama, slightly, or Carter, anyone who slightly challenged what happened to them. You read Obama's memoirs, you can see how he said, I suddenly understood any word I'm saying on Israel can bring down Congress. So I had to be very, very careful. And actually what he says, he admits, I could not be loyal to my basic instinct, which was to be pro-Palestinians. I couldn't, because I wouldn't be a president.
That's a big statement.
Yeah, you should read his memoir. It's very interesting.
And maybe half of the power of the lobby is the assumption of its power. So
I think they're not that powerful, but they're assumed to be powerful.
So if you are a congressman, you'll be fearful. But
of course, if congressmen would think twice and say, wait a minute, let's see. I think that they will find out that they're not as powerful.
Yeah,
but the perception of power is as important as power.
Because at the beginning, in 2016, lots of people were maybe a little bit surprised by Bernie Sanders not going to AIPAC and not going to deliver the keynote.
He wanted to be strong.
Yeah, and he didn't lose much.
I think the landscape has changed. The landscape has changed. I think that the fact that the Democratic, what they call the progressive wing in the Democratic Party is talking openly about Palestine, and nobody is able to prevent their re-election is a good sign.
Yeah.
It's a good sign. So I think I think the lobby was very strong in the last 100 years. I think it begins to decline, but it still can be quite poisonous and toxic and.
The issue of the lobby is very interesting, and we can't wait for the book to be released. A question also about the maybe 48, a little bit before. There is always this story that is repeated, even in Lebanon, because we had our civil war and the Palestinians were part of that civil war. So some factions of the Lebanese always say this, and I read later on that it was propagated by the Zionists at the beginning, that most of the Palestinians just sold their lands.
Yeah.
So it was that simple.
Yeah.
So was there any info about this specific storyline?
Yeah, well, in order to, first of all, one has to understand the transformation in the land regime from the Ottoman Empire to the British mandate. In the Ottoman land law, you could own a huge part of land in Palestine, like the Sursuk and Huri families from Beirut. They could own Marj ibn Amr, which is a whole valley with 15 villages in it. And according to the Ottoman custom and law, even if Sursuk is selling the land to Huri, or Huri sends, I don't know, sells it to Jamal, according to the Ottoman understanding, it doesn't affect the villagers. They pay whatever they pay to the land for the lease, but they continue to live in the villages in which they lived for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
The British come, and they change the land law according to the request of the Zionists and say, no, if I can go to Beirut and convince Mr. Sursuk to sell me Marj ibn Amr, I have the right to evict the villages.
Which
was what they did. And you, the British, have to help me to evict them because you are now the new rulers of Palestine. And that's how Marj ibn Amr, the villages were which belonged to Sursuk and Huri families in Beirut. Now, some of the Palestinian landlords did the same. They sold the land. I don't think they understood that selling the land would result, also the Sursuk family did not understand it, that it would result in the eviction. Nobody understood properly what Zionism was all about, either in Lebanon or in Palestine. It took time.
It would be unimaginable for any person when he sells a land to expect that a state would be formed on it.
Exactly, exactly. Now, somewhere in the early 1930s, most of the Palestinian intellectuals, journalists, activists began to understand this is not a regular project, that this is a dangerous project, and any land we sell is used for building a state at our expense. And since the early 30s, nobody sold land anymore. The result was that when you reach 1948, the Zionist movement succeeded in buying 5.9% of the land in Palestine. Less than 6%, that's all. This is one of the main explanations for the ethnic cleansing, because Ben-Gurion says, the leader says it very clearly. He says, I'm disappointed that this is all we could do. We cannot build a state on 6% of the land. We will have to get the land by other means. He was careful in his diary. He didn't say what the other means. But the other means which are not purchase of land, what could they be, right?
Yeah. And this is what you detailed in your book, The Ethnic Cleansing.
Exactly.
I would first of all recommend that anyone who is interested in the subject to read this book, because it details what happened during the later years of the before the formation of Israel. But I have a question about this, maybe the Plan Dali.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the specific consultory committee that is not really official, but it is. Maybe we can talk a little bit about this.
Yes. It was very clear for the Zionist leadership. Two things were very clear to them the moment they understood that the British rule comes to an end. One is that they will have to, if they want to create a Jewish state, they will have to massively, a Jewish democratic state, as they saw it, with a majority of Jews, they would have to expel massively a large number of Palestinians and take over as much of their land as possible, regardless of what the United Nations would suggest, that they need themselves to decide how much of the land they get and how many Palestinians are remaining in the land. They didn't mind saying to the United Nations, yes, we accept your plan, because they knew that the Palestinians and the Arab world would reject it. The second thing they needed to do is they had some decent people among them, and they said, how do we sell to our own people? We are the victims of the Holocaust. We are the Jews. We are the victims of ethnic cleansing and genocide. How do we justify massive expulsion? Not only to the world. There's some Jews who survived the Holocaust are among us. So Ben-Gurion decided not to have an official decision on this. So he created a consultancy, a small group of advisors, mainly young generals in the early 20s, one or two Jews who came from Syria and Iraq or were born in Palestine because they knew Arabic. And there was 13 people, no more than that. And he hid the plans from the rest of the leadership. And he only presented this as a fait accompli once the plan was completed, and everybody accepted it. So that's why it was done kind of behind the back of some people. By March, April 1948, really near, even then I don't think everyone in the Zionist leadership understood what it's all about, because Ben-Gurion was very careful to present everything that was done as a retaliation against a Palestinian action. Very much like they're using the pretext of 7th of October now to do in Gaza. And people say, okay, it's a reaction, we're not initiating expulsions.
We are in self-defense.
Exactly, it's self-defense. That's why they decided to call the Israeli, it was his idea, to call it the Israeli Defense Forces. It's all defense. Nothing is aggression, nothing is attack or offensive. And I think that worked quite well for them, because they didn't have to share the plans with everyone. And then after 15th of May 48, when some of the Arab armies were entering, it was easy to say, it's a war. In a war, everything can happen. The difficult part was before the 15th of May 48, because the British were still in charge in Palestine. The Arab world has not sent yet one soldier. The Palestinians were helpless. They had few thousand people to protect them. And Ben-Gurion targeted the towns, not the villages. Haifa, Jaffa, Akka, Baisan, Tiberias. These were huge concentration of Palestinians. A 250,000 Palestinians lived in Palestinian towns. How do you expel 250,000 Palestinians when the British are still responsible for law and order, and you're not sure that everyone in your leadership would be happy with this? But he was able to maneuver it in such a way.
And they were quite daring by also targeting the British themselves.
The British themselves, yeah. They were lucky in a sense that Britain, and this is an awful chapter in the British history of Palestine, that the British knew exactly, we know, the British knew exactly, they knew more than many of the Zionist leaders what the plan is, but they thought the best thing was not to interfere, which means under the watchful eyes of the British, the first part of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, that of the towns, except from Lida Ramle and Nazareth, they were expelled. Nazareth was not expelled, but Lida Ramle later on. All the other towns, nine towns, were expelled when the British were watching it.
It's a form of consent.
Yeah, and because people ask me, how does the world watch now what's going on? I said, unfortunately, it watched also in 48. Okay, there was no television and internet, but they knew. They were there on the ground.
Okay, we'll move a little bit forward. I believe that one can label the phase of the post-1967 war until maybe the beginning of the 21st century as a 30 or 40 years period of a peace process somehow.
Right.
You were intrigued by Madeleine Albright's formulation.
Right.
What's visible is divisible and what's invisible is indivisible. Can we talk about this period and this specific notion, why it was so eloquent in portraying how it was dealt with as a period?
This is the what we call Pax Americana, the attempt of the Americans to totally dominate what they call the peace talks and to bring their world of business into the world of diplomacy. And in this world, first of all, the past is not a factor. You start from the beginning. When you start, that's when the conflict begins.
It's always the issue, even with 7th October.
Exactly. So there's no history. Secondly, you always look at the balance of power. Your important ally is the strong partner. And your job is to offer to the weak partner whatever the strong partner is willing to give. And but you have to dress it as if it's a fair idea. That's why Madeleine Albright says, we are dividing. That's very fair. Yes, we're giving the Palestinians 5% and the Israelis 95%, but it's still a division. We are saying that the Palestinians have most of the that the Israelis would have most of the resources, the land, the power, the sovereignty, but we give something to the Palestinians as well. This is what is remarkable is not only that the Americans thought that. There were two remarkable things that happened. It failed again and again, and yet they continue. Even nowadays, Biden wants to revive the same paradigms.
Yeah.
It will not work again, of course.
What's the philosophy of this?
The philosophy, it comes from the business
and
world.
the visible, and what's divisible and what's not.
It comes from the world of business, which is very cold about sentiments, attachment, honor, justice. Justice is not, or moral consideration. You have to throw all of them out of the window, and you are pragmatic. So the question is, where will be the border between Israel and the future Palestine? A refugee issue is too moralistic, too difficult. You
it's
forget
invisible, so
it's invisible.
We cannot divide
It's
it.
invisible, exactly. A Jewish state should never be negotiated. Can Israel be a Jewish state as a racist state? Racism, again, is an invisible idea. So it has to be land, water, military presence, sovereignty, control. These are the elements. But it didn't work, and that was very surprising. What was no less surprising, when someone else would try to replace the Americans, the Norwegians, in Oslo, who said, no, we will do it different from the Americans. They did the very same thing.
They did
the same theory, the same philosophy. What was said, of course, that some Palestinian leaders fell for it. They thought it's better to get something than nothing. I remember Palestinian leaders say to me when I criticized the Oslo Accord, they said, you don't understand, it's better to get something. But I said to them, you're getting less than what you had. And they thought I was crazy. I said, what you had until 1993 is more than what you're going to have after 1990. But of course, to them, it didn't look like this, because they were offered sulta, state, and so on. But I can understand, I understood why they thought it's an advance, it's a progress. I remember Abu Ammar saying to me in Tunis, when we met, and met him several times, he said to me, you understand, we will be inside, and we can do much more from the inside. And I said, I doubt it.
Yeah, maybe it was not a personal issue, but an issue for the what's called the Palestinian Authority later on, being a power that functioned for years from the outside, and they needed some.
You can understand. It's very human. Very human and natural. What they wanted.
On a strategic level is.
It's very human and very natural, and one can see why they thought this was. And of course, we have to remember this is a time when there's no Soviet Union that supports them. Arafat made the mistake with Kuwait and didn't have that many allies in the Arab world. It didn't. exactly led the Palestinians in the right direction during the Lebanese civil war as well. So he was fragile. He was not in a very strong position in the region as well as in the international community. That also contributed, I think, to his way of thinking. But I think in the long run, it proved to be a mistake.
I read something that during this whole peace process, which we have so many initiatives that one cannot remember them all.
That's right. Yes.
From the 70s until now.
Absolutely.
One was a little bit different, the one that George H.W. Bush called for Madrid.
That is true.
Why so? And because I also saw a clip of George H.W. Bush at the time saying that the Congress people, the Congress person that were trying to block this initiative of the Madrid talks were being approached by so many, he said more than 1,000 people from the lobbies were now pushing them to refuse. Why was it so important at the time? Why was it different, at least?
Yeah. It was different for a few reasons. It was different because you had an American president that was not particularly pro-Palestinian, but he was exactly the epitome of what I was talking about the Republicans in the beginning of our conversation. He saw Israel as a liability, not as an asset. You have to remember, he came from, before he worked in the CIA, he and some others were connected to industrial companies that worked in the Arab world.
Yeah.
And he came from this tradition that thought that there was a lot of goodwill towards America and the Arab world. And American interests can very well be served also by good relationship with the Arab world, and that actually the relation with Israel complicates unnecessary this kind of relationship. And he thought that I think he was the only genuine American president who thought of a genuine Palestinian state next to Israel. For him, the two-state solution was a genuine Palestinian state, because all the rest did not. They were thinking more about Bantustan. It was so unique about his team that they worked in 1990-91 with a group of very able Palestinians in the West Bank who worked around Faisal al-Husseini and Hanan Ashrawi, who I saw in the hotel today, and Haidar Abdel Shafi. And they had a group that were called the Tawakim in Orient House, that later the Israeli closed, who prepared a proper, serious structure for a Palestinian state to begin with in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And the Americans were really, those Americans, were very respectful for this plan. They looked very serious. Of course, it included the eviction of all the Jewish settlements from the West Bank. Yes, many Palestinians thought it would not be enough, and they were careful. They didn't say this is the end of the story, but they said, let's begin
from this threshold.
But with the real state, not and then they were, and the Americans were willing for them to bring it to Madrid as a possible conversation. Now, of course, on the other side was one of the most extreme right-wing Israeli government led by Yitzhak Shamir. So there was a dialogue of the deaf. The Americans,
he had to be dragged to the conference.
He was forced with which is unthinkable today. Bush told him that he would impose sanctions on Israel if he's not going to Madrid.
That was a blip in the history of this relationship.
Exactly. So he went there. And ironically, it was not Shamir who blocked it eventually. The Labour Party came to power, Rabin came to power in 1992 with this old snake, Shimon Peres. And he understood what was going on. And he read correctly that the PLO is actually weaker than the Palestinian leadership in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, which was far more assertive.
Oh.
So he said, let's talk to them. It's much easier. It would be easier to get to an agreement.
And that way we'll circumvent the Madrid...
If you could have interviewed, Allah yarhamu, either Haidar Abdel Shafi or, what's his name, Faisal Husseini, they would tell you they were totally surprised by Oslo. Nobody told them about Oslo. I remember I was with them on the plane to Tunis when we all heard about the news, and we were all surprised. They didn't know about that. And they saw it as also an act against them. And later on, they understand it. They try to make the best out of it and help Arafat to settle, and the PLO to settle.
But that's why you always say that there was never an interlocutor in Israel that is really pushing for peace. Not even Rabin and
not even Rabin.
Because this is the main picture that was
Of course. No, the best that could be offered was Rabin offered. This is a Palestinian Bantustan.
Yeah.
With the indirect Israeli control, no return for the refugees, and maybe a symbolic capital in Abu Dis next to Jerusalem. But the Western world, hailed it as an Israeli peace plan.
Two-state solution.
A two-state solution. It was not even a two-state solution. I'm not for a two-state solution, but even that was not a two-state solution, you know. But they managed to lead the world into believing that they are the peace camp and the Palestinians are the rejectionists.
Even with Mahmoud Abbas, whom I don't know, who's more well, I don't know what's the right term, but accepts anything.
Exactly.
So the problem now is that when we reach what the big toll of casualties that is going on in Gaza, and the destruction, and we go back to this two-state solution, and the Americans calling for it, and now this time even the Israelis don't put the appearance of accepting it. So what's next during this phase, this so long of a phase of a peace process, which has minimized the legitimacy of the Palestinian Authority and even the land that it really manages? So what's next now?
Yeah, well, it depends who you ask in Israel, because there are two political forces, but both of them think that in the near future, what matters is what Israel will do, not what America will do, not what Europe will decide, not what the ICJ will decide. They don't see any movement in the Arab world that endangers them, or in the Islamic world. So these are all enigmas. I don't know. Maybe they're wrong.
Yeah.
Maybe Europe and America will change and so on. But I think for the near future, I don't think they're totally wrong in thinking that what matters is what Israel will do. Maybe we could say that some of their plans can be affected seriously by a different policy by Hezbollah in the north, or by an uprising in the West Bank.
Yeah.
Could happen. I don't see it happening very soon, if at all. But let's say that they are right, that Hezbollah would continue this very careful.
Yeah.
What does Hassan Nasrallah call it? We're making the Israeli busy.
Yeah.
Mashrulin, you know?
Yeah.
He invented, I think, a word in Arabic.
Ishghal.
Ishghal, yes. Ishghal. I never heard it before. Which is right. But we don't know. We're not prophets.
Yeah.
We don't know when we talk here what would happen in the north. But let's say it's possible to keep it as it is, and the West Bank is under the lid. Then two things can happen. Either you have a change in Israeli politics to such an extent that the power base of Netanyahu is not powerful enough to maintain him his power, and the so-called more pragmatic Israeli politicians are forming the next government.
Like the Benny Gantz.
The Benny Gantzes. The Benny Gantzes, Lapid, these people.
Yeah.
They are very good, and they think that this is, I think, what they think they can do. Again, I don't know if they will succeed. They are very good in doing what Noam Chomsky used to call to create a peace process that doesn't lead to anywhere.
Yeah.
It's like a car on neutral that makes a lot. Well, most of you listeners have automatic cars, so they don't understand what the car on neutral is. But the car on neutral means that it doesn't move because you haven't shifted. And you make a lot of noise. So you make a lot of noise. You go to peace conventions. Which has
been the policy for the last decades.
They see no reason why they should not continue to do this. And in the meantime, that's what they want, to annex part of Gaza to Israel, either to convince the PA to take part of Gaza, like Area A, to build Area A in Gaza. If not with the PA, then they have this idea of local hamulas. They keep selling us this idea that there are strong families in Gaza, yani clans, not families, who don't like the Hamas and would be happy, each one in their localities. They want to divide the Gaza into...
Which is a little bit absurd because Gaza is formed by refugees mostly.
Exactly.
So
I don't know where they got the idea. So Rafah would be run by one Hamula.
So I don't know the Ashair of the refugees.
Yeah. They have these Orientalists who give them all these ideas, which are not going to materialize. But that's what they're going to try. If, however, Netanyahu is right and the base is much larger than we think, and he stays in power with all these messianic Zionists like Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, what they will do is horrific. They will bring back Jews to the Gaza Strip. They will try to force the Egyptians to accept a huge number of Palestinians.
You're talking about Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, but in effect it would still be a Netanyahu government.
Yeah, Netanyahu government. Yeah. This kind of government has these horrific ideas about the next few stages. Some of them will not materialize because the resistance is not over. Some of them may not materialize because the Egyptian position still has not changed. They're unwilling to accept the idea of building a big refugee city, as Israel is willing to pay for. But these things are volatile. Abdel Fattah Sisi is a volatile president. So far he's been steadfast, but I don't know. I wouldn't bet my money that they're totally wrong, that Egypt is not a partner for something like this. It depends what is being offered, I think.
But the main title of it is that what's really at stake is what Israel decides.
Still is. And that's where for example, the ICJ was a bit disappointing, but still has a chance not to disappoint us.
Yeah.
It was disappointing in a way that it said Israel is committing a crime, but we're giving it 1 month to report to us that it's not doing the crime.
Yeah, it's weird.
It's very weird. What will happen in the end of the month, we know. The end of the month, Israel would submit a report which says, of course, we're not doing what you say we're doing, or the South Africans are saying that we're doing. What would the ICJ do then? I don't know. So there are kinds of scenarios where you can see potential for a less terrible scenario in Gaza, maybe opening something a bit more humane. Although it's very difficult. I mean, you have to rebuild anyway. The strip is over. I mean, it doesn't exist.
It's not livable.
It's not livable. So it's not even easy to develop alternative scenarios which are better for the Palestinians unless you have a totally different idea of what should be the future of Palestine altogether. You cannot kind of separate the future of Gaza from the future of the West Bank or the future of the Palestinian refugees.
Is it plausible to say that one of these tracks or options that are being laid in Israel depends on the American elections themselves? Or?
Yes, it does. It does in the sense that, ironically, there is more chance for strong American pressure on Israel from Trump than from Biden. My Arab American friends are really don't know what to do. They hate Trump, who is a racist against
really
Arabs
and
Muslims, but they know that Biden is horrific as far as Palestine is concerned. And there's no third candidate. I think many of them will abstain in the end of the day because they wouldn't know whom to support. And that's where we are in this idea. Yeah, the key is still with America in many ways. But again, saying that the key is America is assuming that the rest of the world cannot do anything, whether it's the Islamic world, the Arab world, BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's not true. The international constellation can be such that America can be less important here.
Yeah.
But China and India, for different reasons, are not involved. The Muslim
I was surprised even in the issue of UNRWA, which China could have, of course, paid.
Of course,
it's not a big sum for China.
The Muslim world has its own issues with Pakistan and Afghanistan. Yes, you hear positive voices from Malaysia and Indonesia, but it's not enough.
Yeah.
Africa is still the Africa of the 1990s. The governments are very careful not to outrage Israel. The societies are very pro-Israel, Palestinians, but not. Latin America, even Brazil, that is, with a pro-Palestinian president, is very careful in what it's doing. So we have an international constellation that brings us back to the main problem of the world, that the civil societies in the world, not only on Palestine, but Palestine is an important issue. On most issues which are important to most people in the world, the politicians don't represent them.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter, by the way, if it's a democracy or an authoritarian regime. In both cases, the political elite does not represent what really matters to the people in terms of economy and foreign policy. There is a change, there is a willingness of the civil society to demand from the political elites to change. I hope there's a willingness by the civil society to play politics.
Yeah.
If they're not willing to play politics, they can complain.
It would be just a wave.
Exactly, and they can complain until tomorrow morning, but they're not going to be prime ministers. They're not going to be foreign ministers. So how can they influence policies?
Definitely.
Demonstrations influence policies, but they don't make policies.
Any leadership can sustain it.
Exactly. I hope that the many young Americans who are now marching for Palestine, some of them would become the senators of the future, the ministers of the future, maybe even presidents of the future, and will not change. That the same reason that led them to march for Palestine today would still be part of their world.
Yeah. To round up at the
Yes.
end, I want to
You don't
finish.
want to kill me by tiring me.
No. I want to finish by a point that you've been making lately against the tide of what's going on.
Exactly.
That you see that the Zionist project is at decline or an end point.
Right.
How and why, and
Yeah.
how can we expect that this idea would manifest itself?
Yeah. I'm talking about the beginning of the end. As an historian, I know that the beginning of an end is a long period, unfortunately. Secondly, it's a very dangerous period because not only I think this project is in danger of collapsing, the project itself is unsure about its future and is doing everything without any inhibitions to protect it. That's why they're so ruthless now and have no inhibitions. So we have to take into account that when you say such a thing, you are talking about a very dangerous near future. It's one point.
Yeah.
The people don't think that this is just a rosy prediction, right? But you can already, and I say it not as a wishful thinking or an activist, I say it as a scholar. As a scholar, I can see clear indications for the collapse. I don't know how long it will take, but I can see I don't think it's possible to stop it. One indication is the implosion from within the Israeli Jewish society, which happened was very clear until the 6th of October.
Yeah.
Ironically, the Hamas operation delayed it.
Because now there's national unity.
Exactly, but I don't think it will hold. We already see the sign that we're going back to the 6th of October. And what we saw until the 6th of October, that the secular Jews and these Messianic religious Jews have very little in common apart from hatred to the Palestinians or a sense that they are under existential danger. If you ask them for a vision of peace, normal life, even normal life, they say no, this will never be the case. So for many in the young generation of Israelis, this is not an exciting vision. And I think especially the secular Jews are going to lose the battle. I call it the battle between the state of Israel and the state of Judea, the settler state.
Yeah.
I think the settler state is more messianic and ideological and doesn't care about what's going to happen.
And demographically is in a big
And they are
expansion.
growing in numbers, absolutely. And the secular Israelis, many of them are European Jews originally, have dual nationalities, have jobs that they can easily do elsewhere. I don't think they are dying to leave Israel. I think that they invested, even sacrificed. So it's not an easy decision for them. But before the 6th of October, some of the more important elements among them, part of the financial elite, the high-tech elite, were relocating themselves and their capital out of Israel. So that's one indication.
Yeah.
Second indication is the economic situation of Israel. Even before, I wrote about it even before Moody downgraded Israel, because I understood that the microeconomic situation of Israel, the gap between those who have and have nots, is growing exponentially. And the number of Israeli Jews who find themselves under the poverty line is growing. So even if in macroeconomic terms you can see how good GDP and so on, it doesn't matter. I don't think it's very indicative.
It's not an existential threat on the structure, but internally there's the rift between...
The rift, exactly. And of course, 7th of October in this respect accelerated this 10 times more. 10 times more in terms. Thirdly, although there is a paradox that the lack of total confidence Israelis have now in their army and in their government has not made them left-wingers. It made them right-wingers. In the long run, it's a problem for a state. When the society thinks that an army is unable to defend it, it contributes to this undermining from the inside. And I think we have a change in the international legitimacy. Until now, the delegitimization of the state was only in the civil societies. I think we can see the beginning where this kind of attitudes are penetrating the political elites. It's not yet there, but it's beginning.
But the problem is that this integration of the project as a whole lays the groundwork for what? Because at the same time, you don't see a trend in Israel that is growing for peace or for...
You need to see a trend on the Palestinian side. That's the mistake, I think. If we had, which we don't have, a clear Palestinian liberation organization that is accepted by all the Palestinians and includes all the Palestinian factions, including the Hamas and the Jihad, with a clear vision, with a clear message to the Israeli Jews, what is their place in the liberated Palestine, a clear message to the Arab world, how much we want you or don't want you to interfere in the way we're building Palestine. How much a clear message to the refugees, how do we see your... They never did this. This is what, first of all, would change the mind of some Israelis, I think. They would say, okay, there's someone there who wants to take over, and this could be something that would ensure that this integration is not turning into chaos, into fauda, that it turns into something more positive. Because decolonization can be very traumatic. It can be chaotic. But this could, if you have a clear, which we don't have, if you have a clear Palestinian liberation movement, a clear vision that has to replace the two-state solution, then you have a chance that is at least similar to the one in South Africa. Of course, South Africa had a lot of problems because they neglected the economic side. But the Palestinians can learn from the mistakes of South Africa and not forget the economy as well. Maybe we have here something to dream of.
Then we are searching for the day after, but with the capital D.
D, exactly.
Thank you, Dr. Pape, for
Thank
this
you very much,
extended
Thank
interview,
you.
and hope to see you again.
Inshallah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.